Inside of Russia now, the railways are burning and the elite helicopters are exploding. Meanwhile, Crimea is once again under assault, but now with foreign-made missiles fired by Ukrainians into the Russian bases. And all at the same time, back in mainland Russia, things aren't looking much better. Generals are being fired over group video calls. The Russian National Guard has been abandoned, left to sleep for weeks in barracks without leave. And Russian diplomats are disappearing, only to be discovered, weeks later, hidden away secretly in Russian prisons. All these are just the signs, the hallmarks of a regime that continues to rot from within. A regime that is devouring itself from the inside. So today, on day 1260 of Vladimir Putin's 3-day special military operation, perhaps the only thing causing more instability for Russia is not even Kiev pushing east. Rather, it's the house of cards that is the Kremlin falling inward. So, as yet another series of explosions has rocked Russian-occupied Crimea, the Kremlin struggles to convince the public that everything is just fine. Because when you hear the government telling you, don't look here, there's nothing to see, and no matter what anyone tells you, there's absolutely no reason to panic, it's a good sign that there's usually a very good reason to start panicking. My name is Jason Smart. I'm a special correspondent for the Kiev Post. And for over 20 years, I've studied the Putin regime, which was the topic of my master's and my doctoral dissertations. But I didn't just read about the regime. In fact, I actively worked against it, which is why I was put on the blacklist for life in 2010. Now, it's very clear that Vladimir Putin is having some very serious problems. And one of those problems you can see very easily if you read Russian Telegram, because increasingly there's a word that you see a lot, every day, more and more. And that word is Crimea. So consider this. Russia's air defenses are simply becoming overwhelmed. Russia's Ministry of Defense claims that intercepted drones in at least 9 regions. 31 over the Azov Sea, 11 over Crimea, 8 over the Black Sea, and then another couple dozen across other regions of Russia. This was one of the largest drone swarms to breach Russian airspace during the course of the war. The drones targeted areas of hundreds of kilometers apart. Now, Russian air defense claims that it was able to successfully shoot down all of the drones. However, we know that the air defense is stretched very, very thin, and something else contradicts their claims. Namely, the satellite data and the videos showing that there's very clear impact by the Ukrainian drones. And interestingly, just a couple of days ago, we saw the same thing. More than half the drones that Ukraine was sending into Russian bases was over Crimea. So things are going off the rails for Russia. And the Russian press itself is increasingly worried. They know that what is transpiring now could definitely change the course of the war and of history as a whole. However, in the Western press, there's silence. Nothing about this, which is why I created this channel, to bring the truth about what's happening inside of Russia and what's really happening here, where I am now, in Kiev, Ukraine. So if you'd like to help me in that mission, to expose what's really happening with the Russian paper tiger, what is really happening here in Ukraine, I ask you just one favor that costs you nothing, but helps me immensely. Help me get this video to more people. Please like this video. Please subscribe to this channel. And please consider becoming a channel member today. Thank you. So perhaps we should consider that in Krasnodar Krai, the Ukrainian drone strike there, it struck a very important power line, specifically the one that was necessary for the movement of rail traffic between Velichovska and Angelskaya. This delayed all of the train traffic in the area. And why is that so important? Well, this area lies just north of the Kerch Strait Bridge, the critical checkpoint that links mainland Russia to occupied Crimea. Hitting this corridor disrupts the troops, the cargo, and all the flow in and out of the peninsula. But it also forces Russian air defenses to split their focus across the south. So this was not just a shot in the dark. And keep in mind, that very same night, Ukrainian drones hit the Sorovkino railway station of Volgograd Oblast. And there's something in common between those two attacks. The one of Volgograd, that station feeds the same military logistics line that supplies Russia's southern front and occupied Crimea. So when we connect all the dots, a very clear pattern emerges. Ukraine is not just targeting infrastructure, it's actively isolating Crimea. And Crimea seems to be getting a lot of attention these days, for a very good reason. Something is obviously transpiring in Russian-occupied Crimea. And it seems very clear that Crimea is once again under siege. Now, due to these attacks last night, Russia preemptively closed, yet again, the Kerch Strait Bridge. It's the only direct road and the only rail connection from Russia to Crimea. But they were probably right to close it, because just hours ago, another series of explosions across military ranges in Russian-occupied Crimea. It's now picking up. The Ukrainians are now using Storm Shadow cruise missiles fired from aircrafts to strike Russian military bases in Crimea. Crimea is no longer a rear base. It's now an active war zone every single day. However, we should ask, should any military base at all of Russia's be considered a rear base? Because last night, Ukraine stepped up its campaign inside of Russia as well. In fact, in Tver Oblast, north of Moscow, a Ukrainian-aligned saboteur destroyed a Mi-28 attack helicopter. And what's really interesting about that was that it was at the elite aviation school. This is the school, the only one, that trains Mi-28 and Ka-52 pilots. But it also is the one that trains their instructors. So this $18 million helicopter was destroyed with explosives that were planted on the runway. And you know what's really phenomenal? Consider this. This happened inside the secure base. So you know what that indicates? Insider access. That Russia is having some serious problems, but a lot of them are coming from inside. It's not just because of Ukraine, but Russia itself is collapsing from its own corrupt and dead weight. At this point, it's very clear that the Russian security forces themselves are just imploding. In St. Petersburg, the Russian National Guard, Rosgvardiya, its entire leadership has just collapsed. A wave of dismissals, resignations, purges have gutted its command. And just now, the General Lieutenant Andrei Tarasov, who was their boss, their regional chief, was fired via a video call. Well, in fact, more than 5 generals and at least 10 unit commanders have also been removed within hours of that. This is pretty incredible. We see that the riot police began to also resign, to step away from their jobs, and they're citing their own reasons. They say it's due to the fact they've been denied leave, or they're burnt out, or they're collapsing morally. And it's true that many of these people don't see their families for a week, or they're forced to work under a constant state of stress. But there's something else going on here. The thing that's going on here is that the regime is starting to crack. And we see the signs. We have the National Guard, we have the riot police, we see the bases within Russia where there's sabotage on the secure military bases. There's a lot going wrong for them. There's very little that one could argue is going well for them. But there's also an increasing tension that we see picking up. Just consider the fact of Vasily Kravchenko. So he was from the Russian Foreign Affairs Ministry. In fact, he was the former Deputy Foreign Affairs Minister's assistant. He had just returned from a mission in South Africa. And when he got back, he started to have his normal meetings, met with a Canadian representative, met with a Lebanese representative, and then disappeared. Everybody was wondering, where is Kravchenko? Well, it turns out the government had been tracking him and decided he might be a spy. Why is he doing what he's doing? They locked him in prison. There was no trial. They just hid him away. As we see that the regime becomes more and more brittle, it reacts more and more like a totalitarian regime, which it is. There's no longer even trying to act like there's justice. But this is symptomatic of something else as well. It's symptomatic of the paranoia one sees in a regime that is suffering. A regime that's strong doesn't just throw people in prison for no reason. But one that's paranoid, it's because they have no other idea but to go back on this instinct of what will allow them to survive. It's a regime that's struggling to maintain control as the house of cards is trembling in the wind. And there's another reason there's pressure in Russia today. Kremlin officials now have said themselves that they believe that the ruble to dollar rate is a threat gauge. That is, that any rate below 75 to the dollar or above 110 is seen as dangerous. Russia's Ministry of Economic Development has listed several high-risk triggers. Central bank interest rates being so high, falling global prices for oil, grain, metals, and also the reduced trade with India and China. Now, all this has been coupled with the already existent problems that they have. The aging population, shrinking labor force, tougher sanctions from the West. But altogether, it's looking, according to Russia's own think tank, the Kremlin's own think tank, I should say, that Russia will enter a recession in the near term. And despite the people who say that China will bail out Russia, nothing could be further from the truth. Trade with China fell at 8.1% year over year. That's a huge loss. India's own state-owned refineries have frozen Russian oil purchases because of the new U.S. sanctions. Private refineries in India are still trying to buy some oil, but the government level has stopped it. They are not buying any more oil. So the Kremlin's entire Asia pivot is falling apart. Russia is losing buyers. It's losing leverage. There's no one that it can fall back on. And though the Kremlin has now at this point confirmed that Trump and Putin will meet, according to the Kremlin, next week, as cited by Russian state broadcaster TASS, but some people have asked, will they really meet? Or will it be like the Witkoff meeting, when a body double of Putin met with the American representative? So is there any truth to that claim? Well, look at this. Back in May 2023, Japan's national broadcaster, TBS, aired a bombshell investigation, and they came to the conclusion, using facial recognition software, that Vladimir Putin most likely was not representing himself at public events. So their tech is high tech. It scans over 500 data points on the human face, and it's by no means a fringe organization. It's the same category of software as used in the airports or used by the police. Now, what's interesting about this is they compared the images between the 2023 Victory Day Parade and 3 other public appearances, one in Mariupol in March, one at the Crimean Bridge in December 2022, and the footage from other Kremlin events. And the results were not close. Putin in Mariupol had just 40% facial match with Putin at the Victory Day Parade. The Crimean Bridge, only 53%. And between the Mariupol event and the Crimean Bridge versions, there was only 18% similarity of the two Putins. Statistically, those faces were more different than alike. But to go further, TBS brought in a second lab, Japan's Institute of Audio Communications. Their voice analyst focused on the Russian word spasiba, thank you, and found significant vocal changes and pattern changes, which were indicative of the fact that it was different people saying the word. So when they compared the way that Putin spoke at different events over time, they realized it was simply impossible that it was the same person saying the same word. But to further verify their findings, they were reviewed by one of Japan's top defense analysts, and he's associated with the National Institute for Defense Studies, which is actually an official research arm of Japan's Ministry of Defense. But his verdict was clear. Under standard recognition protocols, these faces, these voices, they don't match. So when a major broadcaster, a trusted commercial AI firm, a defense ministry-linked analyst are all concluding that the Kremlin's leader may not be the same man from one event to the next, it's no longer just a conspiracy. Rather, it's more likely and more appropriate to call it what it is, a thorough investigation. So Putin, visibly, is perhaps not only not Putin. In a like manner, Russia's defeat is not just a dream. It's not just a theory. It's quite visible. It's quite tangible. We see it in a multitude of scorched train stations, the destroyed helicopters, the intercepted drones, the jailed diplomats, the collapsing exports. Ukraine is doing more now to win battles than what Moscow can do to try to catch up. At this point, the entire illusion of Russian strength is unraveling. Putin is not just losing the war, he's losing control of Russia itself. Thank you for watching. Please like this video. Please subscribe to this channel. And leave your comments below. I'm curious, do you think that Putin is using a body double? Or do you think it's the real Putin? As always, thank you for supporting Ukraine.